From Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon. On this episode, a conversation with David Ambrose.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wesley Dixon, and thank you to Conversations at the Salt Line. Today, we are so happy to welcome Vassar alum from 2002, David Ambrose, to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I cannot believe it's been that long.
Welcome back home.
Thank you.
How does that feel? How does that word resonate with you relative to this particular place?
110%. It feels right. I walked around campus when I got here, and I was like, where's my student ID? It was like no time had passed at all.
The picture probably looks a little different from when you were here and actually had an ID, right?
I would say I've gotten better with age.
Like fine wine.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. For those listening, David just released and published his memoir, A Place Called Home, that recounts an amazing story of growing up homeless for much of your early years, going into foster care, and really coming out on the other side and living a magnificent life.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I'm sure you have a range of different feelings about what you've been through, where you are, and what's ahead.
I feel like I'm living some sort of life like Forrest Gump meets Hillbilly Elegy with a little bit of Precious.
Wow.
An impossible life with impossible things that have occurred, and yet here I am. How do I feel? I feel like I'm living my purpose, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do with this life and the experiences I had that forged it.
Amazing. You know, it's funny. We, I think, probably grew up a little bit differently. You haven't read my memoir. I don't have one, but I did read yours. I have a sense of how you grew up. But there are a couple of things that are similar and a little related. You want to hear what they are?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the first is I'm really jealous of you. You thought I was jealous earlier because you didn't bring me coffee, but that's not what I'm jealous about. What I'm jealous about is...
I offered.
You did, and I declined. But what I'm jealous about, actually, is that you learned how to drive on a stick shift and not an automatic car. Because I, of course, learned to drive on an automatic car, and I've since tried to learn stick, and it's been the worst experience. My dad is the original owner of a Triumph TR6, which is like, you know, old school sports car, manual, like up and through, and a really hard clutch, incredibly hard clutch.
There you go.
I cannot do it. I can go from first to second in a straight line.
Sure.
Turning is difficult, and this is all in a parking lot. I can't do it on the street.
I'll help. Well, after this, we'll do a lesson.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I love that you read my memoir, and that's what stands out to you a little bit. Yeah, I learned to drive on a stick shift, and I also did not grow up with social media. I just think there was so many pluses to being the generation here at Vassar. Even, you know, we sort of had the internet.
Yeah.
I would do searches on Netscape for information.
Oh my goodness. Can I tell you, when I read the memoir, it made me feel so young or old, because you reference these proper nouns like Netscape. That was like, oh shoot, like I used that when I was in elementary school learning typing. Like I have not heard that since. There was some other store you mentioned that I'd never heard of. It was
Caldor.
Thank you. Didn't know what that was. Still don't know what it is.
It was a mile and a half that way.
What kind of store? What's its cousin
like
today?
It was a poorer person's Kmart. It's where you went if you were really poor.
Okay.
And students would always go there for kind of a sundries. And then it was going bankrupt. Walmart was kicking its butt.
Wow.
And it had this kind of 60s vibe to it.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, Caldor, Netscape. I mean, there's all sorts of
things,
retro things that I recall.
I hear you. There's one other thing that you noted that we differ entirely on, and that is that you have a tendency, I have read, to waste liquor, by which I mean, when I read the part of the memoir that you put great wine from the best region of Spain into super soakers to spray them on other young people, I had a conniption, because that's just ridiculous to me. I mean, you're wasting like top quality wine on young people, no less.
And me and 10,000 other people. But it was in the context of this festival that celebrates wine, and it was kind of a birth for me, having gone through foster care, to be over there in northern Spain in a family of love with my friends. And not only do they throw wine around, you're essentially partying for 3 days, but not in a kind of Las Vegas way, but a very like beautiful, as wholesome as it can be to drink that much wine.
Meaningful, like cultural sort of experience. I hear you. Honestly, reading your memoir was so touching and so moving in a variety of ways, and knowing where you've come from based on what you've written and seeing where you are now, Mr. Hollywood. You know, how does it really feel to think about having people like, you know, Hillary Clinton and Whoopi Goldberg, like know your life, know your story, revere what you've written? How does that feel?
It sometimes I feel like a balloon. And I think balloons can float away and become untethered, but I am incredibly grounded in why I did this. So to have that adulation lifts you up, and you just got to remember why I published my diary, why I'm sharing the most intimate parts of my life. I was actually reminded this morning, I came in on the early train because I'm always worried about being late.
Yeah, you did not tell me that time. You gave me a much later time.
I was worried. Last night I couldn't sleep. So I was in Grand Central waiting for the first train out of Grand Central. And I looked around and I realized, and I constantly am struck by that I slept here for years in that facility. And here I was coming to Vassar, where I went to college, to talk to a nonprofit that's helping people like I was then.
Yeah.
So to have those individuals you mentioned, their adulation, their recognition is super important. It's amazing, especially Hillary Clinton, who I could not more respect for her work on behalf of children.
Yeah.
Decades.
Right.
It means everything. And it's also a passport. They loan their imprimatur when they do those things. And so it's very meaningful in that way as well.
That's super helpful to hear. Now, when I read the memoir, one of the things that really stuck out to me as sort of a theme or sort of a framework in my mind is sort of this theme of education. Of course, we're at Vassar, so of course I'm happy to say that. But really, what I mean by that is sort of this sort of learning and unlearning that I sort of picked up that you sort of experience in your life a lot as you maneuver different parts of your experience being homeless, going through foster care, and then coming to Vassar and beyond. So at one point, for example, you said, the system really pushes you to be more conniving, right? Because it's super hard. You have to sort of fight for things that are basic essentials. And to your point, the system, in your words, really encourages qualities that it actually condemns at the same time, right? So that's sort of one thing. On the other hand, you say comments like, I actually was a great fundraiser for my school sort of activity because I learned how to sell a lot because I was a foster kid, right? And so it's funny because there's this positive part where we're getting these great skills and learning how to sell. It's amazing, right? But at the same time, there's a recognition that there are things you picked up along the way that you might want to unlearn or leave behind. Talk to me about that. Sort of how have you parsed through what you want to sort of take and what you want to leave as you have departed the life of your childhood?
I think everything I experienced has made me the person that I am today. And there's nothing I want to leave behind. Each experience was built upon the one before it and has made me hopefully a tool for progress for people that I come from. There are things I'm not proud of that I had to do to survive. One of the chapters I wanted to call The Hustle. And it was ways that I essentially robbed people, selling fake school raffle tickets or whatever. But that's what you had to do to survive. And it's not that I sell fake raffle tickets today to survive. But when I look at things, what I realize is that the rules and the society we live in is much more fragile than we imagine. When people think about flipping a coin, it's heads or tails, right? Well, the third side is actually called equipoise. Is when it lands on its side. And that is society. It's a collective delusion. And my deepest, most important education from birth, being born into homelessness, was that all of this is made up. And if you relieve yourself of that stress, if you believe that you can get out of this, you can, even though you're facing impossible odds, as I did. Not everyone's going to, because the delusion is very powerful and the gravity is so powerful.
Just clarify, when you say the delusion and this is made up, what is the this that you might be referring to?
Rules.
Got you. The pretense. Got it.
Pretense. I remember when I was about 4 or 5, I was begging on the platform at Grand Central. And up in front of me, about 4 feet, without even looking at me, the crowd parted and then came back together behind me. And what was so remarkable about that is packed concourse. But they did not see me. They didn't even look at me. And how can I blame them? I was filthy. I had all sorts of rashes and lice. I wouldn't want to be near me. And I realized in that moment, although I didn't have the words, that I like to say I was unplugged from the matrix. So when I think about rules, my life should not have happened the way it did. My success should not be, I should be another statistic, which is what my book and my life has been all about, which is increasing the odds. But if I believed what society told me, I would not be sitting here talking to you at this amazing campus.
Right. Now, it's funny, though, because there were times that you did follow the rules throughout your life and in the memoir, and it seemed like they were to your betterment, right? I mean, you're sort of navigating a system that had certain rules that you might have disagreed with, but you still chose to follow them to survive, whether it was the household rules of your foster parent to be able to continue going to camp or have your job, whatever it was, right? You weren't always bucking the system because you knew that you had to follow the rules to some extent to be able to make some progress. So how do we sort of identify that tipping point, right? Sort of existing and sort of navigating for whatever systematic progress we're trying to feel at that moment, and then just saying like, it's all made up. Like none of it's real. How do we sort of make sense of those two things together?
Well, it's kind of hand in glove. I think what I always think about is the long game.
Yeah.
So in order to achieve that long game, you have to do the things as tactics now. And those tactics may be, as you say, following the rules or not bucking the system in one particular moment. But there are moments that I did. And for me, it was the long game in getting out of the cycle of poverty that I was expected, along with my siblings, just to perpetuate and stay in. There are absolutely moments that you have to go along for your safety, for your survival, because you can't fight every single day and every single minute, as I am human. So absolutely, it's an astute observation. But the long game and the way that you think about how to achieve, how to get out of the most abject level of poverty that our country has to offer, that took skills, that took the education, and sometimes I had to go along in a system. And also there was, I was a child, and as I grew, I gained additional kind of intellectual capacity to understand. And one story I tell is the last time I let someone hit me and what I did, and that was truly the last time. And I reached intellectual capacity at a point where I was like, even though the system says this is okay, I'm no longer okay with this. Right. And I know that I don't have to take it. So at times I seem to have gone along with the flow, but it really was the long game.
I hear you. When I read your memoir, I don't know if you get this a lot, so I apologize if it's a common reaction, but I found myself wanting to actually start to sort of draw a flow chart or sort of like a map of the places you've been. And I say that because I was trying to keep up with the number of different transitions and not even the reasons why there were, but just what they were, so to say, right? And I think the fact that I ended up giving up on that task speaks, of course, to how tumultuous or sort of just not stable your life was as a child. How do you think about those transitions? I mean, I had a different task. I was trying to make sense of it for understanding. You had to live it. So how do you feel reflecting back on the numerous different iterations of moving around and living?
I kind of look at it in two big chapters. First was the homelessness years and hours in a location, sometimes a days, but never beyond that. So for me, that was normal. I was literally born into instability. I was born into bodega bags as luggage where you carried everything with you, into shelters that were not meant for children. I grew up in New York City when all over the city men were dying of AIDS in the shelters where we were, or on the streets with us. It was a city that was not doing great at the time. So that was my normal. Then in foster care, I don't talk about all the placements I had because that would be a very long book, but I gave examples of each. And they're a fraction. How do I think of it? I am grateful for the experience as it made me the person that I am. And I mourn the childhood that I did not have.
Yeah. Speaking of the childhood you didn't have, this may not be the exact thing you're talking about, but I, of course, was moved by the changing of your name or the going by a different name, right? And for those who haven't read the book, David's name is not actually David. It wasn't always David. You can read about that. But that for me was a natural partition too, sort of, or I thought it would be actually, sort of the post-David or pre-David and then David and beyond. Does it feel like in real life, in your life, that is a partition or not really? That was sort of a label change that didn't have any substance in aggregate later on in your life?
It was only in my late 30s that I really understood how impactful that was for me. My coping mechanism throughout my life had been from really early on just to take all these insanely impossible, traumatic and violent things, which was every day, and put it in a clear box and put it on a shelf. And I would label it, and I would have a card catalog system, and I would not deny it. I could intellectualize it. I didn't have to feel it. So I took that with me right into foster care. And, every shade of violence and perversion, I just could put away and didn't have to experience fully. When I was in my late 30s, that shelf broke. And all of those things came tumbling off, and my coping mechanism was gone. So one of those boxes that opened up was Hugh. My name is Hugh John David Ambrose McMahon Kilduff. And my mom converted me to David because she wanted me to be Jewish when I was about 7 or 8. And it was a very violent conversion. And it all works and it all turned out okay. But it was very violent. And I didn't understand what that did to me and how people built on that in foster care.
And maybe how you built on it too in your own life, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
You might have taken in the lessons that people sort of were
Yeah.
teaching you, right or wrong, as part of that transition,
Yeah.
right?
Words matter. I think we've learned a lot in the last couple of years about pronouns and words and language and how powerful it can be, especially if you're unseen. And when I was about 7 or 8, I was just completely erased and became someone else. And you often in foster care, even on the streets, you had to become someone else to survive that day.
Yeah.
But in my mid-late 30s, it broke. I learned through great therapy and love and friendship that I could have the full experiences that this world has to offer. I love the name David. My name is David. I've made it mean something, and I'm very proud to be called David today.
I'm happy to have you here, David. You just mentioned a few moments ago the importance of words, and I love learning and I love being corrected. And I have learned from our students and from others who are more active in this sort of space than I am, that the common sort of word we use now is unhoused to describe people who we would otherwise call homeless in a different generation. I've not heard you use that word. I've heard you use the word homeless. And I'm curious if you have any perspectives on those two words, why you use one or not the other, or things like that. I'm just curious to know how you think about that language.
I've heard a lot from folks. I also use the word queer, which I blame Vassar for. How I look at it is, what is my goal? And everything else is tactics. My goal is that there's now 8.4 million kids living in abject poverty. In order to do that, I need the public with me. The public is not going to call them unhoused. The nonprofit industrial complex will call them that. Great. I think that's fine. But if I want to talk to the general public and use obtuse language that doesn't move my movement along, then I'm not doing what I set out to do. So I fully support it. And you kind of have to code switch, and I do. But for me, I need to bring the public with me. And if you go out into the streets, ask Joe Q. Public or Maria Q. Public, what are they going to call them? And I also think there's an element of privilege that as a person who experienced it for 12 years, I don't want to be renamed. I support whatever organizations want to do. But for me, my goal is to have less people living outside of 4 walls.
Of course.
And if that engages the public through using common language that's not, in my mind, insultive, then I will use that language.
100% fair, and I think I mostly agree with you. I think it's a lesson that many people can learn, particularly when they're in their college years, right? I think you're very ideologic. You can be when you're in college, and you have the privilege to be, right? You're sort of in a classroom that sort of encourages you to think in a certain kind of way, which is great and a great practice for you. But then, and then I should say, there is a life that requires you to be strategic and effective, which might mean sort of shedding some of the ideologic layers a little bit as you go through that journey. So I think it's a good lesson you just taught our listeners. Identity, of course, is laced throughout your memoir and your life, of course. Clearly, one of the biggest identities that you started to own, probably here at Vassar, was that of being an LGBTQ youth, right? And it was so both wonderful and hard at different parts to sort of read and hear how that sort of came about in your life. But I can only imagine what it's like to have lived that. So what was it like sort of being a gay homeless boy, a gay foster boy, and then a gay person who used to be homeless and used to be in the foster system? How does that sort of play a role in how you think about your life and your experiences?
The lesson taught to me from my earliest years was that it was wrong, that I was wrong. The lesson was taught with the neglect of our society for the men dying of AIDS in New York City all around me. The lesson was taught because it was frankly illegal to have sex in most states. It was the law. gay was a four-letter word. And so I learned that very early on. My mom's also, now is no longer, but was profoundly homophobic. And that taught me. And then I went into a system that hurt me and tried to make me less gay through systemic violence and malpractice of therapy. That lesson was taught to me. And I came to Vassar on I called myself a Frankenstein of fellowships and scholarships. Not all of them from the college. And some of them were from very conservative people.
Yeah.
And so it was very clear to me that that was, again, part of my identity that I was not ready to come out with because of the trauma. But also, I wondered what would happen. And you'll never know why that scholarship doesn't get renewed from outside the college. You never know. I had quite a number of jobs while I was here, and still I had to beg for money in terms of scholarships. And I was afraid. And then when I was here, Matthew Shepard got crucified. And I was like, oh, there's society. And I was watching the news, listening to people talk about the gay panic defense. Well, of course he murdered, he hit on them.
Right.
So we forget that it was until President Obama's second term where we evolved to accept gay marriage. And it wasn't until the teens, Obergefell, where we could start having full human rights. So I think we've advanced quickly as a queer movement, but it was brutal. And I often would rant at God and be like, are you kidding me? On top of all of this too? Right. And yet that experience, while I was here, set me to work to stop the national policy that was in place until we stopped it, where the federal government would reimburse states for reparative therapy. And I was part of that. And if you think about all of the kids that would have come after that might have experienced that, it was worth it because I got to be part of people coming up after me and making their life more livable. So it was a brutal lesson. I'm a happy, healthy queer man. It was a very painful lesson, but I also did something with it, which makes it a little bit lighter.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Throughout the memoir, I was touched by sort of the flashes of light of some of the amazing people along the way who really, in my mind, in my reading, lightened the load for you and your family throughout different parts of your journey, whether it was Holly and Steve or Vanessa or different people who just did small little acts of kindness to make that day or that week much easier. It really hit home for me that it doesn't take very much for people to be able to help someone else, particularly someone in your circumstance. At the same time, while I'm sort of thinking, oh my goodness, look at this angel who's helping in this day and they're just making this one thing a little bit better, I sort of hear you write and hear you say like, yeah, but that sort of is like a short-term Band-Aid thing, right? They're really, not these social workers, they're in it for life, many of them, but these sort of actions of kindness, right, are sort of making me feel good. They're making me feel like I'm doing something that I get to walk away and sleep well at night, right? So really, what could people like me and others do who feel like I'm not meant to be a social worker?
Sure.
I don't think that I have the capacity to parent someone in a meaningful and health and safe and productive way. I don't want to be harmful to them. Sort of how do we move beyond thinking about these moments of kindness, not leaving them away, like including that, but doing more than that and having lifetime of kindness relative to youth who are in the foster care system?
I call those folks my occasional angels. And two thoughts to your observation and question. First, I think of the poverty programs in our country that are meant to alleviate poverty. I think about the person experiencing poverty as drowning off the side of the boat. And all these poverty programs are in the lifeboat. And they come along and they reach in and they pull the person out of the water and the person goes, and they take a deep breath. And then that program drops the person back in the water. And then another person comes along, the program. And again, we never pull the damn person out of the water. That is the intergenerational poverty and violence that we just so readily encourage people to pass on. So I don't expect every person to walk by a homeless person and solve that person's issues. But that's where we stop. Our country has gone from sending a man to the moon to being proud of filling potholes. I do not know what happened, but I don't accept it. I believe instead of starting with, I can't because, each of us should start with, I will, or I can. What can you do? Can you log into one meeting per year for your county that deals with homelessness? Can you educate yourself? Can you spend an hour off of a social media platform and Google local homelessness issues? Can you donate $1 to a great worthy nonprofit? Can you call your council office or write a letter one time and say, hey, what are you doing about homelessness? Can you ask your kids' school, do they have programs to support homeless kids? Do you need me to start a clothing closet where kids can pick up clothing? What can you do? And if you can't go all the way to fostering or solving, what can you do? And that orientation shift is completely doable. I watch every time there's a disaster in our country, that's the instinct we have. The problem is the disaster is ongoing. Right. And we forgot that we can do big things together. We denigrate government, but government is the sandbox we create so that we don't kill each other, that we play in. We are the government. So you may not be able to do that full Monty program to help that individual. What can you do? And one final example, I hear that question quite often around foster care. Well, I can't foster, so. I'm like, well, that doesn't relieve you of duty. Right. So I started this campaign called Donate Your Small Talk. What does it mean? When you get in the elevator or when you start a Zoom meeting or you start a meeting, everyone's like, how was your weekend? How are your kids? What'd you do this weekend? No one cares.
I care sometimes.
Rarely.
I do.
You're the leprechaun. Mostly it's verbal filler. Yeah. It's nicety. It warms us up. What if we say, oh, it was good, but did you know that Coco Chanel was a foster kid? What? Start centering the issues that you start to become aware with by caring in your conversation. And by donating your small talk, you're taking an affirmative action. It is the lowest barrier to entry. Absolutely. To do something. And so that's the piece. That's remove that thought that I have to do everything or nothing. What can you do? Well, here's an example of this, the basic level. And then we go up from there. And my nonprofit, fostermore.org, has a ladder of engagement that you can plug into.
Wonderful. I love that. At some point throughout the memoir, you mentioned in sort of an editorial way that you, I forget the exact wording, but basically you say, I'm tired of sort of the Christmas presents. I'm tired of sort of the greeting cards. I really, want you, the readers and people, to think about and sort of support or engage elected officials, others, vote around and for people who support improvements in the foster care system and sort of eradicating poverty in general. When I read that, it made perfect sense to me. And of course that makes sense, right? We should definitely do something active about it. My question, though, is how do I, Wesley, parse through and find the right people who support those things? Because obviously you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who says, I don't want to end homelessness. I don't want to end poverty. I think foster care should be a safe and healthy system for the kids who are in the program. Those, I think, are generally fair assumptions people would make and say, I'm supportive of that, right? But yet and still, we have politicized sort of environments. People think about the how much differently often. And so I guess my question is, does the how matter, right? Or should I just vote for anyone who says that they want to end homelessness or poverty? Or are there certain hows that we should think about as the ones that might have the best value, the best bang for their buck, and have the best outcome for the population we're caring about?
Super important question. So first, I donate toys at my office or Toys for Tots. My point in that is the appetizer to the main course. And the main course is, what are you doing to alleviate poverty? Yeah. And the problem is we stop at the toy. And the story I tell in the book is I often had to leave those toys behind because I became homeless again. Mm-hmm. So they're beautiful, they're important, they're meaningful, they make magic, and then I'm starving. So it's a beginning of something, and you should use that as your first date and then want to have a second date. And I guess your question seeming to me is, what can we do and how do we find that action? Right. There's no one answer to that. I have in my pocket the most complicated computer in human history called the iPhone. Right. I have figured it out. I talk to I shouldn't say mostly men, but many men who talk about sports teams and go all the way down to stats from 1970 something. I have friends who are obsessed with movies and know all the Academy Awards. And yet we're perplexed on how to use Google when it comes to homelessness. We're perplexed. Well, what's the graduation rate for men and boys of color for LUSD? You can find out. It's not good. Right. What can we do about it? Well, not a single member of the school board has a kid in school. How do you feel about that? Just your eyebrows went up. That is revealed on Google.
Right.
So what can you do? Use the same tools, dedicate 2% of your time
To something else.
Start to educate yourself. We live in a democracy while we can maintain it, or a republic. We have a revolution every year called an election. Be part of it. In your local area, start educating yourself. And if you don't know where to begin, go to my website. I have a portal that takes you into how to get engaged hyperlocally on foster care, which may not be your issue. But I scratch my head because we know how to do big things as individuals. We figure it out. But we're so confused and we're like throwing our hands up. It's learned helplessness, and we need to unlearn it.
Yeah. No, one of the things I appreciated most about your book, really, as someone who I think I take pride in being a generally educated and thoughtful person, is that you really hit the nail on the head in terms of what are the actual sort of pain points for a child growing up homeless or in foster care that we might not see or think about, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of, I like to think about it as sort of revealing how expensive being poor actually is, right? Which of course is a paradox that people might not get, but it's obviously very true for those who have lived it, right? Yeah. Can you just recount for those listening sort of what are some of the examples or sort of key indicators of just like where the rubber hits the road in terms of having to make ends meet as a child who is homeless and or in foster care?
Poverty is never about the future. Poverty is about now. How do I survive now? And now manifests in a million different ways. Now is, where is my next meal coming from? Now is the Kafkaesque process by which you can qualify for rental assistance. You need an address. So in order to do that, you have to have a place where you can get mail.
Right.
You couldn't use food stamps for whole categories of products. And then on the back of the food stamp, it says, be mindful, don't overeat. It literally is printed on the food stamp. And I remember thinking, by the third week of each month, we were out. And you're lecturing my family on don't eat too much? And you've given us almost nothing? Accessing healthcare, a complete joke.
Oh, those stories were some of the most grating to read in the book.
We dehumanize homeless people. We scratch our head, we step over them, they're in clear mental distress, but progress is being made. And I'll give you a concrete example. The largest mental health care provider in most jurisdictions are the sheriff or police. Not right. California passed something called the Care Court, which decriminalizes the mentally ill homeless people and puts them through a different system that mandates treatment. Some civil rights groups are not happy. Other ones love it. I love it.
Those who aren't happy, why aren't they happy?
We have fetishized the civil rights of people who don't have the mental capacity to exercise them.
Right.
And we did it in part because of the awful system we had that treated mentally ill people in congregate care settings horribly. The answer is not to let them live on the streets and exercise their civil right. The answer is to give them humane, appropriate treatment. I take care of my mom. I'm one of her caregivers. She's mentally ill. I actually started taking care of her when I was here at Vassar. I found her to be homeless again. And it has been brutal to get her the services she needs. If Care Courts existed, I would not have had to fight this hard. So we can make progress on this. The pain points were everywhere. It was almost as if it was intentionally designed to be impossible to get out of poverty. From a war zone-like policing structure where we felt under siege for being poor, to government policies like taking your kid out of school in order to go down to the welfare office. So in order to qualify for welfare, you had
to be out of school.
You took your kid out of school and you couldn't make an appointment. You took a number and then you just sat there.
And hope you got seen that day.
What if you need to go get food? What if your kid had to go to the bathroom? You missed. So the small indignities add up. And we can do better. We can do better. I think about, if you go on Facebook, you can do invites, you get birthday celebrations, you can watch news.
You're dating yourself.
Okay. Well, I didn't say Friendster, which I was on here. Why don't we have a simplified system for poverty in this country? Why is it so hard? Why do we criminalize people for accessing a public benefit? And why is there so much shame associated with it? I don't have any shame to say that I would be dead without welfare. I am a kid of food stamps. I'm proud. And we should help people that need help. I don't understand why we condemn that so much.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't agree either and don't understand why either. One of the things when you said this, it reminded me about an interesting part of your memoir. I was really touched isn't the right word, but I was moved, I think, and appreciative of the fact that you acknowledge and named sort of the ways in which other systems of oppression, so to speak, exist, even within this one that is horrific, which is homelessness and being in the foster system, if it's not a positive experience for you, right? And of course, that is racism. And so you mentioned a number of times sort of how, whether it was you advocating in DC with different Congress people, how they would sort of usher you away to sort of the ones who maybe needed the most, nudging because you were the most well-presenting, all these different coded words about you being white and sort of presentable and respectable. And also even on the street, even among those who were homeless who were of color, they sort of still recognized that if there was a white homeless person, they were likely more able to get the resources than they would have been, just because that system still pervades every aspect, at least of American life and 100%. Probably life in the world. How do we think about addressing both those things together, right? Is there a policy framework? Are there actions we can take that we think both address racism and poverty and the issues in foster care? Obviously, one might argue that they are sort of the same issues, right? But are there things that we can think about collectively as we're thinking about both those issues together?
I have chills, and I mean that really. It's such an important question. And I wrote my book, and then the murder of George Floyd happened, and COVID, and there's just delays in the whole industry, publishing. And it was so different to read my book after and have more of, I thought I was woke, but to go back and look at it. And I thought a lot about the stories I told, like the police violence or being in a congregate care delinquency facility. I thought about the names. I didn't want to perpetuate stereotypes. And I was really lucky to work with someone, an editor, African-American female editor at Legacy Lit, who worked really hard with me, because what I said to her is, I don't want a poverty porn and I don't want to reinforce stereotypes, but I got to tell my story.
The truth, right.
And I really worked the best that I could. And I in aggregate numbers, there are more Caucasian people in foster care, but from a disproportionate perspective, it's unbelievably biased towards Black and brown families. And what can we do? First, acknowledge it. My sister's a social worker, and she says, when you shake an apple tree, apples fall. Why don't we go hang out in wealthy neighborhoods and see what's going on? We don't. We sit there and we shake the apple tree in poorer communities. And poverty is a euphemism for racism. And so what happens? Well, then you over-criminalize poverty. 2/3 of the kids entering foster care, 2/3 are there for neglect. Neglect is a euphemism for poverty.
Right.
Poverty is a euphemism in our country for racism.
Right.
What can we do? Stop taking the kids out of the homes. If mom needs rent help, if dad needs a job,
right.
Don't take the kid away. If they have a bad month, work with the family. And I'll tell you something interesting. The two most important bills in my lifetime signed for foster care are the Chafee Independence Act, which is the bill I talk about. Yep. The first time we spent money on kids as they transitioned out of foster care, which is called emancipation. And then the second bill, written by Karen Bass, Congresswoman Karen Bass, head of the Congressional Black Caucus, signed by President Trump. And for the first time, it did something. States get roughly 90+% of what they spend on foster care reimbursed from the federal government. This bill, for the first time, said a state can use that money to preserve the family. So it used to be you could only get reimbursed from the feds if you took the kid away.
The child away.
What a revolution. Clinton and Trump, pow, what a mind blow. Karen Bass, of course. But
yes.
What can we do? Call your state legislator and say, have you opted into this? And if you have not, encourage them to. Because that is a civil right we need to lean into, which is we've got to stop destroying families, especially families of poverty and color. This is one of the biggest mechanisms we can do. Because I tell you, the stats coming out of foster care are not good. You're more likely to become homeless than go to college out of foster care. You're more likely to die than go to college out of foster care. More likely to go to jail than go to college.
Right.
Let's keep those kids out of the system if we can. And what's interesting about that is then what happens? Well, the system has less stress because it's not overtaxed as much. Yeah. And so the kids that need to be there get the attention they need. Right. So I think one of the biggest things I think of, and it's actually in my book as a policy recommendation in the afterword, is lean in on that. Lean in on that. We could, we could really, I think about all the foster siblings I had, hundreds, and I don't even remember their names. I remember their faces. Mm-hmm. And I just think about where are they today? And they did not need to be in the system, many of them.
I agree with you. One of the things about words and language, I wrote it on my notes actually, and I highlighted it in the book many, many times. I was so struck by the use of the word emancipation when sort of a foster child sort of took themselves out of the system. And of course I heard it before, and I understand it. It makes sense why that word is the word that it is. But only when I read your book and when I heard it in this context or read it in this context did I sort of say, this is really something else. And it's probably not a coincidence, right, that we use this word to describe this particular process for a different, but as we know, probably similar group of people who have used this word historically for something else. It was truly something. Just one other thing before I sort of go to the last part of our conversation. I was curious, and you intimated this just now, about not remembering the names but the faces of your many foster siblings. And I was genuinely curious sort of how you think about relationships and friendships, having grown up in a way in which you maybe didn't always have people around you for long periods of time. You didn't have the childhood friend from 5 years old who you stayed in contact with until you were in college, and now you all are best men at the wedding or whatever it might be, right? So how have you learned or come to understand what it means to make and sustain relationships outside of that system?
The most important lesson I had was from my foster son. I tell the story in the book where, because I was queer, they put me in a delinquency facility, which is very violent. And I was assaulted almost immediately, very violently. And that was the last time I cried, from 12 until I was 37. And what I did is I just shut that off. I shut off full feeling because it was dangerous. And I, through that, then did not have the experiences that lead you to have kind of social intelligence. I could work a room, I could talk to Congress, but develop a friendship? Absolutely not. Even here at Vassar, I struggled profoundly to be quote unquote normal, casual consumption, hanging out without a purpose. Put me in a room full of 40-year-olds, I'm golden because that's what I learned to survive. That's a skill that I grew. In my late 30s, being a father, and I was in a relationship for 13 years, I began to understand that I had more I could experience. And I'm grateful to the friends I have that have stayed with me. But it was a skill you have to learn. And you have to learn to be uncomfortable. And Spain starts to tell that story a little bit in the book, where I felt emotionally, what's the right word? Emotionally inept. My brother, laughingly, I made him listen to Hamilton, America's First Foster Kid. And he said the song that reminded him most of me was He's Got No Chill. Mm. And what that was me protecting not being vulnerable by being busy. You got to be vulnerable to develop those authentic relationships. You got to realize that people will hurt you, but you don't have to let them. And pain is also part of love. Avenue Q, do you remember Avenue Q?
No.
It's a musical, and she says, the more you love someone, the more you want to kill them. Mm-hmm. It's a very funny puppet musical. So now that I have the full range of emotions and abilities, I'm just basically putting it out there. I practice what I call vulnerability, which is I text my friends, like, what are you doing? I'm alone. Let's play.
Or you write a memoir about your life and the hardest parts of it. I think that's peak vulnerability.
Yeah, publish my diary. I like to say that I still have not published my hidden album on my iPhone, but everything else is now in the public domain.
Well, I will say, I noted that the memoir does end at 22, and you are almost double that, or approaching double that, right? And so there's no shame in that. Listen, There's no shame. It's a blessing and a privilege to be
like legendary. No shame, no shade, no shade.
So I'm curious about what happens in the last 20 years, but maybe
turned out well.
That's in the next memoir. I am curious about your foster child to your son. I imagine, I know you've learned lessons from the parenting that you have had from the variety of different people and applied that to how you raised your son. What are sort of the top 2 things you've thought about as you raise him that you've taken from your experience, good or bad, growing up in the system?
Well, I had an epic failure. My perception was...
Of raising him, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
How I applied it. So I used to say to foster kids, if you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, buy a damn flashlight. And it was just so dismissive. And what I really was trying to explain was the world does not care. They don't owe you anything, and they're not going to pay it. So if you realize that, you have more of the power. If you're waiting for forgiveness, it ain't coming. So I did not give my son the space to mourn or be vulnerable with me. I never talked about what I had experienced. And so I did not give him that space to talk about it. And what I said was like, put your head down, do the work. And he went to Berkeley. He's at Cornell getting a PhD in AI, in part because of the way I raised him, but also because of who he is innately, and also because in his middle of college, demanded that I create the space and share with him so that he could share with me. And he taught me to love more deeply for it. And how funny, you asked me what I applied, misapplied. And kids teach. And I was at that point aware enough to learn. I loved him relentlessly his entire time with me. And that is something my mom taught me. The book opens up as a dedication to my mom. Right. And that imperfect love I gave to my son relentlessly. I was with him last night, even though I was passing through the city for 5 minutes. He's the most important love I have in my life, the most important thing I've ever done. And I have gotten so much out of it. He's amazing, and he's taught me a lot.
I'm sure. You taught a lot of people a lot too, so it's all coming back around. Before we finish, we have some hot seat questions from some students.
Great.
You were once one, so they can be a little spicy. They're not anything crazy, actually.
Let's do it.
They're fun. So the first one is, since you currently work at Amazon, which we didn't even talk about very much, but people can read about that. Since you currently work at Amazon, can you tell us what your favorite Prime deal is or has been?
Oh God, my favorite Prime deal. I use all of those services. I don't know. 2-day delivery. I basically use Prime for everything. I think.
What did you buy last Prime Day? What were you waiting for Prime Day to buy?
I'll tell you what I bought.
Yes, thank you.
Don't judge me, folks. So, I bought. This is how bougie I've become.
Tell us the answer to the question.
I bought 2 tabletop battery lights so that my dining table had a nice soft glow and I didn't have to use overhead lighting.
I like that.
That's what I bought.
It's an amazing purchase. Second thing is, you also used to work at Disney.
I sure did. 12 years, 13 years. A long time.
You would know. But what is your favorite Disney movie?
Wow. My favorite Disney movie. Gosh, nothing classic. Oh gosh.
Oh really?
No. I mean, they're all fine. I appreciate the Disney films, but I'm not obsessed in that way. I can tell you my favorite movie, which is probably more interesting anyway. Empire of the Sun.
Haven't seen it.
A beautiful film by Steven Spielberg about the Japanese internment camps for Americans, actually, in Japan during World War II and China, Indochina. That's my favorite film for no particular reason. I love Dead Poets Society.
I like that too.
I struggle, but I love Precious. It's a very meaningful movie to me.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm sorry not to have a Disney.
No,
classic
it's okay.
Film.
It's okay. You're just not brand loyal,
I don't
but
work
it's
there
okay.
anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And the last question, which you sort of answered in part, but I'd love to hear another answer if you have one, is are there any particular states or communities that are doing a really good job combating poverty in unique and exciting ways?
I would say California. And perhaps it's because I'm more aware.
Right.
Care Court, I can't say how important it is. And the option to use funding to preserve families is profoundly impactful. And California's been doing that, actually. They got a waiver before it became law.
Right.
So California, and I'm a little bit more aware of states like Washington and New York are doing good work, but those two are, California's leading the way. And I would encourage folks to look at both the funding to preserve families and look up Care Court. And encourage your local jurisdictions to adopt that, because we should not have the county sheriff or the local police be the largest provider of mental health care. It's just not right.
I think I can agree on that. David, thank you so much for coming here to Conversations at the Salt Line. And we have learned so much. We have laughed. We had a good time. And I hope that you enjoyed it too.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank you.